A follow-up on Johnson's Pond.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Really, it's a response rather than a follow-up, right? Well, how do you know? Why am I asking you? It's great, great to have you in. Thanks very much for tuning in to My State of Mind, which, who knows. Last week, we talked to you about Johnson's Pond, and we had the head of the Civic Association and the state senator in, Mark Lemoy and Lou Raptakis, respectively. And they were here laying out the complaint that some 600 plus homeowners around Johnson's Pond in Coventry, it's really a lake, have with the new, last few years, water rights owner and the way he operates the pond and the dam, which he acquired a few years ago from a long-time organization that had control of it, as part of what's really an archaic system of another one of those weird things in Rhode Island government, like fire districts, which we should have done away with about 50 years ago. The lawyer who is here today represents the operator of the lake, of the pond, of the water rights. And he's got an argument too, and I think he needs to be heard. He was on my radio program a couple of weeks ago and impressed me with his skill set. That doesn't make the folks around Johnson's Pond very happy, but he's here to make the arguments for his client and the presentation. Let me go back to a news package that we've run a couple of times now that gives you some sense of where this thing is.
The property owner of this floating dock says it's been on the water of Johnson's Pond for 8 years. It wasn't a surprise for this property owner when he saw his name on a list made by the pond's owners, Soscia Holdings LLC, taking issue with the structures.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Soscias and Soscia Holding are trying to look for any little way to just be a problem.
In April, this letter was sent by Soscia Holdings notifying the town they are in violation of the lease. The lessee, being the town, the letter says, should have not allowed structures like docks be built on properties without the owner's written consent based on that lease. The Soscias inherited the agreement when they purchased Johnson's Pond's water flow rights and dam about 3 years ago. Town leaders aren't commenting publicly because of ongoing litigation. The Soscias are suing the state over a law that passed last year, giving DEM some power over the water levels.
But it's tough also because we don't really hear anything from the town because the town's trying to keep everything private. But fingers crossed that this is able to be resolved.
Soscia's attorney Patrick Dougherty says more properties will likely be added to the list, adding in a statement in part, the town of Coventry is directly ignoring the lease and its very own ordinances and building codes. If the town had performed its obligations, then the docks would have been properly permitted.
Okay, you got that? In essence, the Civic Association had kind of laid out for us last week what he sees as the essential problem. Mark Lemoy.
Well, the controversy is ownership. Water levels have not been maintained as they have been historically for many, many years, 50 years, 70 years. I've lived on that pond since 1977, and we've had periods of drought here and there, but the water level's never gone down this far as these graphs show. This water data was sent to us by Quinnipiac Reservoir Association on a weekly report every Friday. We have the data that shows water level full starting April 1st through the end of September. Water level is erratic, goes up, down, those gates are open and closed constantly. We get rain in, he lets it right out, instead of letting it just naturally go over spillway.
All right, so Patrick Dougherty is here. He is the lawyer for Soscia Holdings LLC. Doug Soscia is the lead, client, and there are two other Soscias that are represented, yes. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thanks for coming in.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Let me just say this. Everyone who I've spoken with who would like to figuratively, at least, strangle your client, has admitted that he's got a great lawyer. And I don't usually puff up, folks early on, but you've been able to at least convince, and I'm talking about homeowners. I now have bumped into, because we've been paying attention to this on the radio and the television, I'd say a half a dozen homeowners or vacationers there who've said, hey, I've seen the thing, blah, blah, blah. I'm so glad you're talking about this whole thing. All I want's the 4th of July. What is this guy doing to the water, blah, 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 blah. But I'll tell you, they got a good lawyer, like you said. So it's important that you came here, and I'm glad that you did, because your client deserves to be represented versus the allegations that have been made last week. Before I dig into any of the specific questions that I have, why don't you give me a 30-second, 1 minute, if you will, executive summary of what you think this case is about?
Well, I think this case, in terms of the public outcry, is about misinformation that's been put out there. The Johnson's Pond Civic Association and Senator Raptakis have done a remarkable job about trying to focus this issue as a statewide and an environmental issue, and it's really not. It's about a private pond that was built by private owners and a dam that was built by private owners to benefit private mill owners downstream. What most of the people in the town don't realize is that they have no rights whatsoever in the water.
No, I think they're getting to know that.
Okay.
No, I think they are. Sure. I think they are getting to the point where they think, you know what, we're in a jackpot. But please finish your thought.
And the problem is that the approach that has been taken by the town of Coventry and also by the Johnson's Pond Civic Association is a scorched earth. No, you're not getting anything. They're going to try and beat us down. Well, they're not going to beat us down. We've got the law on our side, and we've got constitutional property rights that are inherent in my client as a result of the purchase.
Your client bought this property a few years ago for a total, well, bought, again, we have to be sure we're acute with terms here.
Sure.
Bought the water rights.
Well, they purchased some land upon which the dam was located. They purchased some land below the dam. And
which is developable.
Which is subject to regulation,
sure.
TM, wetlands and whatnot.
Yeah.
But they also own land under the pond, and they own all the flowage rights. See, what happened was in the 1800s, when Quidnick Reservoir was formed, they went ahead and they purchased all the land and built the dam and then flooded it. And then once that was there and the levels were established by the dam and what they could impound in terms of water to supply the downstream mills, they sold off the abutting properties with no riparian rights whatsoever. And the controversy over the water has gone on for over 100 years. I think we've provided you things from the early 1900s.
Can we pop up a couple of these graphics so I don't forget them over the course of time? These are old stories that you have supplied us. A water level problem. That year was a water level problem.
I believe that one was from the 70s.
The 70s, okay. Throw up another one. We can just high water peril at Johnson's Pond. And so, I mean, you can tell just by the type print what kind of an older newspaper this is in. And Coventry councilors make a splash. And if you take a look at this one, you can see a very shallow body of water against land that is probably, I mean, it looks like exceptional low tide, correct?
Exactly, and that's the problem. This has been portrayed as if my clients are subjecting this pond to conditions that have never been seen before. When Mr. Lemoy has come on here and said it's never been like this before, that's just an out-and-out misrepresentation. His graphs show stream flow in the Patuxent River, but they don't show the level of the pond. We have gatekeeper.
There's a difference between the two?
Oh, absolutely. Stream flow is what is going down by the Washington Bridge downstream in the South Branch of the Patuxent River. It's the cubic feet per second measurement of water passing through that area as measured by a USGS stream gauge. Now, what is different from that is the levels change, or the stream flow changes based upon conditions of weather, rain, drought, what have you, and how many gates are open on the dam, whether it's a half gate, full gate. There are 3 48-inch pipes that are encased in concrete that are cast iron at the gatehouse of the dam that are used to provide a controlled flow of water downstream. But what is the true measure of what the level of the pond has been in terms of discrepancies are the gatekeepers' records, because there's a system in place that's calibrated to measure exactly how many inches below spillway the pond level
And
is.
who keeps the gatekeeper's records?
The gatekeeper himself, who has been he's been there for now, I believe, 37 years. My clients inherited him and kept him on the job because he's doing a great job. He's testified in court.
Does he turn the spigot on?
Yes, and closes it off.
At his own discretion or at the discretion of your client?
My clients rely heavily on him. As a matter of fact, the town just took his deposition about a week or so ago, and he testified, obviously truthfully. Judge Lanfear, in fact, in Superior Court in 2021, when we were in there on one of the town's injunctive relief motions, stated on the record that the gatekeeper was probably the most credible person out of all the witnesses testifying at the trial.
And is he Switzerland in this case?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And my clients
Does he express, I'm asking you to not advocate, but to give me an objective point of view as much as you can. Does he express distress over being an agent of this controversy simply because he's the guy that's got to operate the actual dam?
Well, unfortunately, the distress that I think he's subjected to is the ridicule, the swearing, and the vitriol coming across the pond from one of the campgrounds that's located adjacent to the spillway, where he has to go out and check the water level. He inspects it every day, but as he said in his deposition last week, he said, I want the pond up. I live on the pond. He has a gatekeeper's residence that's located next to the spillway, and he lives there. He loves living there.
Right, so you're suggesting that your client has not done anything. Let me not put words in your mouth. Let me ask the question.
Sure.
Kind of like the judge who says, sustained. Ask the question. Don't lead the witness.
You're wearing the robe here.
Yeah. Are you suggesting that your client has never made a discretionary decision with the level of the water inconsistent with the history of the pond and whatever environmental and weather impacts have been brought to it?
I can say this, Dan. My client has made discretionary decisions, which they're reasonably entitled to make in accordance with the lease, to prevent flooding and to be a responsible dam operator. Part of the issue, the huge issue with ownership of the dam, is the liability that comes attendant to ownership of the dam. He is liable, or Soscia Holdings is liable for any flooding upstream of the dam and downstream, which can both occur. And one of the problems that has complicated the issues in the public perception of my client is that in 2021, when there was this first initial outcry of the massive fluctuations, it was the most active storm season in terms of hurricanes and tropical storms that we've had in decades.
Was he more diligent
yes.
or neurotic? My word.
I think it'd be a combination of both, simply because of the fact that the vitriol and the threats of litigation against my clients have increased their awareness and sensitivity to their liability.
Litigation about flooding, or litigation
Both.
about quality of life being impaired by the people who live around the lake?
About both, about flooding and also about the quality of life. But unfortunately, the quality of life has to remain secondary to the safety of the people that are downstream in the South Branch of the Patuxent River. One thing I can state unequivocally is since my client has taken ownership of that dam, there has been zero flooding in the South Branch of the Patuxent River. It's never reached flood stage.
Versus,
well, I mean, in 2010 there was with Irene.
Well, that was the flood of the century.
Yeah, but we're getting
everybody was under it.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. But my client, in that storm, the dam was wiped out. The spillway.
It's since been repaired.
Yes, but you know what? It's fallen into disrepair as a result of the town not doing its required maintenance.
The town's responsibility
under the lease
is the dam.
Well, to do certain things. They're supposed to remove brush and growth on a yearly basis from and around the dam and its components at the spillway. And they're also supposed to repoint the mortar on the pillars and the spillway itself. None of that's been done. My client had to do that, and the town even refused to pay for it, even though it's called for payment under the lease.
All right, we're going to pause here. We're going to come back and talk about the dynamics of this lease. Who who has the authority, what is the relationship, and the expiration of this relationship which is pending. Never mind the court case. Stay with us.
We had to act in the General Assembly to give DEM now the oversight over any pond or lake greater than 1,400 square acres. It's going beyond Coventry. It's a statewide issue. All legislators from Warwick, East Greenwich, Newport, everybody's supporting this concept.
There's a new state law that has been passed, which is suggestive that it is for all bodies of water in the state of Rhode Island. But it is no doubt genesis from the Johnson's Pond controversy. Would you agree?
It was originally called the Johnson's Pond Protection.
Gotcha. And the law quickly states
that in order to have a reservoir of a certain impounded body of water of a certain minimum acreage, you had to apply for a permit from DEM to operate your dam, and also to apply to operate in a manner inconsistent with historical levels that are dictated and determined by the Rhode Island Director of DEM.
Okay, well, that was a little bit of a spin, but yeah, I get it. Good job. But what, in essence, it's like, hey, the state's in charge. The state's in charge, more or less. And so you're in court on two levels, correct? You have two different. You were in court last week.
Oh yes,
on this.
We have a state court action against the town of Coventry for breach of the lease, and they've counterclaimed saying that we're operating in bad faith.
Right.
I don't see them getting any legs underneath that argument. And then there's a federal court action where my client is suing the state of Rhode Island, the director of DEM, and the director of the Office of Compliance and Inspection on constitutional issues for a taking of their property rights and an unconstitutional law that interferes with their property rights in the operation of the dam. And now with the most recent enactment of more legislation and regulations, we're going to be adding some additional factors to the federal court case.
All right,
well.
so talk to me specifically about the town and the relationship with your client running Johnson's Pond water operation there. The town leases from you. The town's lease is up next March, correct?
Correct.
Do you have an obligation to do a renewal deal with the town?
No, there was nothing whatsoever contained in the 2009 lease. They had leases dating back to the 80s. They had an agreement in the 70s. But there was a 1994 lease and also a 2009 lease, periods of 15 years. The town,
has there ever been a gap?
No, not really. The 1982 lease brought you up to 94, then 94 up to
What's
2009.
wrong with their compliance with the current lease? Which was originally with the Aquidneck company, and Aquidneck sold its rights to your client 3 or 4 years ago for $1.7 million total package, correct? What is wrong with the town's compliance, as succinctly as you can make the argument?
Well, they're not fulfilling their obligations. I mean, we were in court last week alleging that the town does not have insurance. We're supposed to be a named insured on a policy to which we.
Do they shrug their shoulders over that? By the way, the town is the bane of frustration for everybody. The Civic Association, me, you, I'm guessing, they don't speak. They won't speak publicly. They played it close to the vest. They seem very, very nervous and neurotic about I've used that word twice, but it feels that way. It's not good public service for the town representatives not to be able to at least speak in some careful fashion about where they are with this. Having said that, can you find a remedy with the town in order to renew the lease?
They've expressed reluctance to have anything to do with it
What if
anymore.
there's no lease? What happens?
Well, then it falls upon my clients to monetize their investment with respect to the dam, their water rights, and flowage rights.
Meaning what?
They could do any number of different things. We could apply one of the concepts that was thought of early on, and they were solicited, was for floating solar. There are literally 900 acres of water that they could put solar panels on, which wouldn't require any sort of removal
Meaning,
of trees.
okay, we can't make a deal with the town. We're no longer going to sustain this lake, the Johnson's Pond, for recreational quality of life for the homeowners. We're just going to do what we can do because we don't have a partner in the town to maintain its part of doing that quality of life recreational thing, correct?
Yeah, correct. I mean, one of the things that was one of the benefits to Quidnick when they entered into this lease was that
The prior company.
Yeah, and my client, if the town would fulfill its obligations, was no property taxes on any of the premises, including all of the pond, the dam, and the 100 acres of upland that are below the dam.
Yeah.
They were supposed to do all the maintenance, and they were providing a payment, which I think this year was akin to about $56,000.
Right. Have they made the payments?
Well, yeah, but they tried not to. They tried to pay the payment into the registry of court. They filed a motion back in April, and that was heard and denied.
It complicates things, but when we come back, what is the solution? I offered one to our last panel. Let's see what the lawyer thinks. Stay with us. So the folks at the pond, the town, the legislators, they're all like, this guy's nuts. He bought it for $1.7 million, meaning your client. He wants $100 million. Is that true? Did he ask for $100 million?
He initially, that number did come out way back when.
You're even laughing out loud over that one.
Well, actually not really. If you look at what the town gets out of this, their tax rolls, they accrue $92 million in added value to the ponds around the town on the town's own tax rolls.
Yeah, so they're between a rock and a hard place. I said to the panelists last week, you really ought to form a district, make an offer, and take this guy out. Take your client out. Make an offer he can't refuse and be done with this.
That would be the simplest way. There are two ways to do it. Number one is to agree upon a price. Number two is the eminent domain. I think with all the...
I've never heard an attorney for a property owner invite an eminent domain.
Well, I invite it because of the value of what this is.
Meaning you think an eminent domain will bring the right price?
Yeah, I know one thing for sure. They're very afraid of what that would be.
Any idea what the price should be?
It's subject to negotiation. I mean, there's a lot of creative ways that prices can be arrived at. There are many, many different things, but I do agree with you. I think the way for the citizens in the town to make this work is to create a dam district.
And they better hurry before the end of the lease.
Yeah, I think it's probably beneficial for them to do that. And we're always willing to talk.
A lot of acrimony, huh?
Oh, horrible acrimony. Yeah. It's just ridiculous.
One guy said to me, all I want to do is have a good 4th of July. Well, how's the water level going to be for the 4th of July?
Hopefully it's going to be up there. We've got minimum stream flows that we're maintaining, but we would love to. I would love the town to get their insurance and make sure my client is protected.
We'll keep the conversation going on both platforms on the radio as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
You bet. Final word. Tell you folks around the water in Coventry, you got to take the emotion out of this whole thing. See how archaic and stupid this structure is. Do something about it, change it, and make a deal. That seems to be the answer. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.